but it's being, studied by the DEA to be, placed in Schedule 1 any day now. It's quite psychedelic. It's smoked it's smoked primarily. Some people snort it. It says, it starts to work as quickly as DMT does. It's about 10 times as potent on a milligram per milligram basis. So in other words, a full dose of DMT, if you smoke it, is around 40 milligrams, and to get the same kind of intensity of effect with 5-methoxy DMT is closer to 3 to 5 milligrams. And people differ in their responses to these drugs, but if you wanted to make a generalization in terms of characterizing the properties of one versus the other, DMT tends to be more visual, and 5-methoxy DMT tends to be more of a flash into the white light. The DMT experience is more visually articulated. It's a lot more complicated visually than 5-methoxy DMT.
Well, how would you say that it compares to traditional uses like ayahuasca, which has been used for thousands and thousands of years?
Well, so how does what compare?
Well, like smoking it or taking it through an IV. You
mean DMT?
Yes.
Oh, DMT isn't orally active. If you just swallow DMT, it isn't really going to be doing anything because there are enzymes in the gut that break it down quite quickly before it can get into the bloodstream. So the native populations in Latin America discovered that if you combine plants containing DMT with other plants containing an inhibitor of those enzymes, then you can swallow the plants containing DMT, and the DMT is orally active.
That's MAOI, right?
The enzyme in the gut that breaks down DMT is MAO, or
monoamine oxidase, right?
Right, and the inhibitors of that enzyme in the companion plants are called monoamine oxidase inhibitors, or MAOIs.
And they allow the DMT to actually come out through the ayahuasca into your brain.
Yeah, well, it allows the ayahuasca to hang around in the gut, long enough to be able to be transported into the bloodstream and, from there to the brain. In the studies that I did, and, when people use DMT on the street, in order to bypass the fact that it's broken down in the gut, it's either smoked or injected or snorted. So the main difference in terms of in terms of the difference of the routes of administration is the speed. So if you smoke DMT or if you inject DMT, it starts to work extremely quickly, within a few heartbeats, within a few seconds, and the peak effects are over. The peak effects occur within a couple of minutes or so. You start coming down thereafter, and you're fairly normal within a half hour to 45 minutes. If you swallow DMT in the form of ayahuasca, it'll start working in a half hour to an hour. The peak effects occur within 2 to 3 hours and are resolved at around 4 to 6 hours. But I think qualitatively, the visual and psychedelic aspects of the DMT are quite comparable. The major difference is in terms of the time course.
Right. So the ayahuasca lasts a lot longer, but
it's not quite as deep, quite as profound as smoking it.
It can be, depending on the dose. The thing about smoked DMT or injected DMT is it starts so quickly. You really can't prepare or build up to it.
You just fly off, right?
Right. You just you're just kind of blown out of a nuclear cannon. And with the ayahuasca you have some time to orient towards the effects and respond to it. Kind of move along with it a bit more comfortably. But still, I think in terms of the depth and the profundity of the material that one can access. I think that ayahuasca, it can just give you some more time to kind of keep your eyes open. with smoked or when you inject or you smoke DMT, you just kind of have to hold on, to your seat.
It all happens too fast.
It just so happens, it happens so quickly. It can be, rather disorienting.
Well, when you administered the DMT, did you use an IV? And also, were your subjects ever blindfolded during their experiences?
Yeah, well, we gave the DMT intravenously, so that's about as quickly as you can get it into, somebody's bloodstream. And in the first few, volunteers that we studied, we just asked, people to keep their eyes closed, but it was kind of disorienting in those folks because they opened their eyes either to look around at the room or in response, to the shock of the intensity of, the onset of effects. And in either case, it was kind of disorienting, for them, especially because the visions of the DMT would oftentimes be overlaid, into the room, the visual field of the room. So it could be kind of confusing. So after a couple of months, we just started putting blindfold on the volunteers. One of those little, silk, kinds of eye shade things that you used if you're going to be sleeping in the middle of the day. They're comfortable and they're silk and, aren't intrusive at all. So subsequently, if the volunteer did open his eyes or her eyes in response, to the onset of effects, it would still be kind of, dark around, so they would just kind of close their eyes and, get back into the experience that way.
What were your thoughts before the study, and how did they change afterwards?
Well, my thoughts about what?
About DMT.
And psychedelics in general.
Well, let's see, that's a big question. I kind of came into this study, well, I'm a clinical psychiatrist, and I trained in, biological psychiatry and, psychoanalytic, Freudian kind of psychiatry. Also, I had undergone a fair amount of, work and training with the Zen community. So I felt I was, fairly well equipped to understand the kinds of things I was going to be seeing, or the kinds of reports I was going to be hearing from the DMT volunteers. And, I was thinking that I would be armed or equipped with interpretive tools and conceptual, frameworks that could contain and understand and kind of help, people interpret their DMT experiences. But the thing that I was most struck with and surprised by and ultimately really unable to explain was what seemed to be the external, sort of independent, freestanding nature of people's experiences, the worlds that they seem to encounter. All three of those models, the biological and, the Zen and, the Freudian, psychoanalytic, all of them place a primacy on the mind as, generating the phenomenon as opposed to just perceiving the phenomenon. And in the case of my volunteers, they all kind of rejected any possibility of their minds, generating what it was that they were perceiving. They were much more inclined to, to propose or to, believe that they were just, perceiving, something that they, couldn't perceive, previously. In the beginning, I kind of interpreted away, their interpretations, but that just didn't work. They rejected that. They got defensive. And, these guys were sophisticated, psychedelic explorers. They were doctors and, they were lawyers, psychologists and psychotherapists. They were all stable, contributing members of the community. So they just weren't these, kind of weird, freaky people. Some of them were better trained and smarter than I am.
Well, did you ever find that any of them lost their sense of reality, such as this world isn't real, or maybe the DMT world is more real than what we're experiencing now?
Well, not really, no. There was one guy in particular who came in oftentimes for some of the pilot preliminary work we were doing with a drug called psilocybin. So he got slightly unhinged as time went